Hi, this is Alessio. Hope you're well, and welcome to a brand new special video on Iran and the whole Iran crisis and situation. So guys, in this video, I'm going to go into detail about what's really happening in Iran and the whole crisis and situation with the possibility of a war. And I'm going to actually take a look at the war indicator, very important chart I want to take a look at here today. And I want to discuss what this particular war indicator or war meter is telling us. Is a war more likely or less likely? And what is it telling us? Plus, we'll take a look at the price of oil and what the price of oil could be telling us about a potential furthering of the crisis or indeed the tensions in Iran and the Middle East. So we'll take a look at this in a few moments. Before I do that though, many of you asked me, Alessio, how come you've been silent on this whole issue? Why have you not made a single video or mentioned a word about the whole Iran situation over the past few days, the past week? In fact, many of you sent me emails and comments over the past few days saying, Alessio, you've been to Iran at least 4 or 5 times the past 10 years. How come you haven't said a single word about the whole issue? Why have you been silent about it? So guys, I want to tell you in this video why I have not said a single word about the whole Iran situation and why I'm coming out now and talking about it. So there's some reasons behind it, and we'll go into more detail about the whole crisis and situation in this video. Guys, before I start though, I do have an important favor to ask you, which is, I know on YouTube, if you're watching this video on YouTube, for example, please do not fast forward through this video, because I know how it works on some of these videos. Sometimes people just fast forward and skip ahead to the parts about the charts and everything else. I would kindly encourage you to not do that, because if you miss the first section of this video, especially this important section cover about Iran, first of all, you might actually miss on some key points, because you need to understand the whole context before you can actually understand what really is happening in the country. And I'm going to share with you important information you're not going to get from the mainstream media and some of the social media channels. So the first thing I want to cover in this video, guys, is why I have been silent on the whole issue of the Iran crisis and the possibility of a war, which seems to have cooled down so far at the moment. The first thing, guys, the first point I want to make is this. The reason I haven't said a single word about the Iran situation is this. Over the holidays, over the Christmas holidays, I actually made a decision not to ever watch anything to do with politics or news ever again. Not for the next 12 months anyway. So I decided my New Year resolution would be, I'm going to avoid politics, I'm going to avoid all this nonsense in the news, because guys, as I'm sure you probably agree with me, 95% of the stuff you see on the news and the mainstream media are just propaganda and lies. I'm not saying everything is a lie, but the majority of it is just propaganda, spin, and not really news, but just people's biased opinions and really just a bunch of lies. Now, you might agree with me on that. So I decided, in fact, I was reading a very important book over the holidays. You probably saw me in the videos reading it, Beyond Good and Evil by my favorite philosopher, Friedrich Nietzsche. And Nietzsche says in this book something very important. He says that in your life, you should try to embrace things which are life-enhancing and avoid things which are life-negating. So what we should try and do in our lives is to move forward towards things which increase our power, increase your power and increase your happiness, and avoid things which make you feel depressed and make you feel weak. All right, guys, and I think most of you can agree with that. So I decided that I'm going to avoid all this politics and news because it makes me feel very depressed, angry, and really upset. Unfortunately, because of the situation that happened recently in Iran, I decided to break this rule for maybe just a couple of videos. Hopefully I'll stick to my rule after this. So guys, for the next few minutes, I'm going to share with you information and facts that you will not get anywhere else, anywhere from the social media sites or indeed from mainstream media. And here's why. 95% of the people out there on social media who are posting videos about Iran, they're made by people who've never visited the country. This applies also for people on the mainstream news as well. Guys, majority of people who are reporting supposed facts on Iran, they're made by people who've never ever set foot in Iran, never visited the country. Guys, let me ask you, if someone said to you, hey, I've never been to America, I've never set foot in the United States, I haven't got a single American friend, but I'm an expert on America and the United States, would you want to listen to them? Would you care about anything they said? I doubt it. I doubt it very much. By the way, guys, let me share with you something else. I have friends here in Britain who have never visited the United States. They've never been to America. And their opinion of America is very biased and negative. They think America is a violent place where essentially everyone over there is a bunch of religious fanatics who don't like non-Americans, which is completely false and is completely untrue. I mean, guys, one of the things I love about America, every time I go to America, I tell you about it because I love the US, I love America, and I love Americans too. In fact, half of my family is in the US. So the bottom line is, guys, that when you get your news about the United States only from one source or only from a few sources on the, on the news, mainstream news, you're going to get a negative and biased and skewed picture of the country, right? Because most of what we see about America in the news and in the movies are just make-believe and propaganda and lies. And the same thing is true about Iran. Most of the stuff, I'm not saying everything, but majority of the stuff you see in the news and on social media sites are really just propaganda. Again, lies being repeated over and over again. So guys, I would suggest that, if you get a chance, go for yourself to the country. Actually go visit Iran like I have, actually go and see for yourself. One of the things I'm very lucky to have done over the last, 10 years of my life, in fact, I've visited Iran at least 4 or 5 times. And, I've been to the country, I've visited the historical sites, I've talked to the people there. I've actually sat down and eaten with people there. I've made friends with people there. One of the people I showed you in my videos in the past is a guy called Human, who is absolutely excited about cryptocurrencies. He loves cryptos. So bottom line is, guys, these are people just like you and me. They're no different than you and me. And guys, one of the things you find out when you go to Iran for yourself is how much it is different from the perception you get, on the news and, in mainstream media. Because the mainstream media, all it does is just show you the negative aspects of the country, just people shouting angry messages or burning flags, but they never actually show you the real country. All right, they never actually show you that the people over there are very warm, very loving, friendly, no different than you and me. They have the same desires, fears, and feelings that you and I have. And in fact, if you don't believe me, guys, go and watch a video by an American who went to Iran. He'll tell you the exact same thing. There's a massive difference between what you see on the news and what you actually experience as a person who actually goes to Iran. And the other thing is this, guys, that while the mainstream media and most social media channels only show you the negative stuff, they never show you the positive stuff. For example, watch this video over here. Many of the people out there don't know this, but after the events of 9/11, after the 9/11 attacks, many thousands of Iranians actually went into the streets and they marched in the streets in support of the American people. They held candlelight vigils. In fact, there were people in the streets with tears visibly upset for the American people after the horrible events of 9/11. There were many people in the streets protesting against the terrorists, and you could hear people saying sympathy to America. That's what people were shouting in the streets, sympathy to America. That is the real picture of what Iranians are like, what Persians are like in Iran. But of course, they don't show you any of that on the mainstream news networks. On the mainstream news networks, the narrative and the message they want to push on you is that, oh, look at this over here. These group of people over here are your enemy, they're dangerous, and they're all bad. That's the message they want to get through to you. Again, it is false propaganda. It's a bunch of lies. You might be asking, well, why do they do this? Why do they keep spreading these lies and propaganda? The reason is very obvious, guys. It's called the Lucifer effect. Because essentially, throughout history, major powerful people have managed to manipulate people through the emotion of fear and disgust. What they do is they dehumanize and demonize a group of people, and they get them to do whatever they want. Again, we don't have time to go into that, but that's one of the important things we should mention here. The other thing I want to mention here is this. So there are a few facts that I think it's important for you to know about the history of Iran. Because if you don't understand this part, guys, about the history of Iran, then you won't understand the people there or indeed their psychology and how they think. So here's some of the things that I need to share with you. Firstly, as you probably know, 2,500 years ago, at least 2,000 years ago, Iran or Persia was a massive empire, which stretched, as you can see here, stretched to the west and the east, as you can see here. And let me share with you now some important facts on Iran. Firstly, again, these are facts that people don't know about Iran. Firstly, Iran or Persia was the first civilization to call for the abolition of slavery. They were the first people to install freedom of religion. In fact, the person you see here was responsible for this. The first king of Iran, the first Persian king, was Cyrus the Great. And Cyrus was such a magnificent person. Actually, Cyrus is one of my heroes, one of my personal historical heroes. This is a guy who realized that slavery was inhuman and must be abolished, that everybody has a right and a freedom to worship whatever religion they want without being persecuted. Also, Cyrus the Great, the first king of Iran, he also freed the Jewish people from captivity in the year 539 BC. And as a result of that, Cyrus is mentioned as the only secular person in the Hebrew Bible that is referred to as Messiah or God's Messiah. And that is in Isaiah 45:1. It refers to Cyrus as God's anointed, and in the Bible, anointed means Messiah. Also, the name Iran is older than the name Persia. Many people don't know this. Many people think that Persia is older than Iran. It's not true. The name Iran is much older than the word Persia, and Iran just means the Aryans. Now you're probably thinking, why does that matter? That was 2,500 years ago. Why does that matter today? Because when you talk to Persians, when you talk to Iranians in the country, they'll tell you that what makes them proud to be a Persian or an Iranian is because they descend from Cyrus, King Cyrus. So they're very proud of their heritage, their culture, and the fact that they're descendants of King Cyrus and his great achievements, as I just mentioned here. So again, that is opposite what the mainstream news wants to tell you about the people there. Now, before we take a look at the charts and talk about the war indicator, I just want to mention this quickly. I have never believed, and I still do not believe, that President Trump wants a war. Okay, so I've always defended President Trump on this point, that he's not a warmonger. Okay, President Trump is not a warmonger, and I think he was given bad advice about the whole situation with Iran recently. I'm not the only person who's saying this. Rand Paul said this recently too, that President Trump was given bad advice. Look, I don't think President Trump wants a war, but there are people who surround him, very likely the neocons, who do want a war. Again, guys, remember, there are people who surround the president who want to push him into a war, direct conflict with Iran for their own personal financial gain. Because as you know, guys, war equals profits for big business and, for some corrupt politicians. Guys, look, I don't agree with everything President Trump says or does, but there are two things that I like about the president. Let me tell you what they are. In 2016, the one thing that stood President Trump out of everybody else, the two things that stood Donald Trump out of everybody else among the Republicans, was that he was the only person among the Republican candidates that said that politicians in Washington, D.C. are corrupt. And they don't answer to you and me. Okay, they don't answer to the people. They only answer to money and power. That's all they care about. They don't care about the people themselves. And I think you and I can agree on that. It doesn't matter whether you're left or you're right, whether you're Republican or Democrat, doesn't matter. I think we can agree on that. The majority of politicians in Washington are really corrupt, and they care only about their donor classes. The second thing that President Trump said back in 2016, which is correct, was this. Let me play it for you.
Obviously, the war in Iraq was a big, fat mistake. We spent $2 trillion, thousands of lives. We should have never been in Iraq. We have destabilized the Middle East. I want to tell you, they lied. Okay. They said there were weapons of mass destruction. There were none, and they knew there were none.
So guys, as you heard there, again, Donald Trump was right. We spent $3 trillion on a war based on lies. The fact is, guys, President Trump was right about that. And there are people in the conservative media, like Tucker Carlson, who are also saying the same thing I'm saying. They also agree that war with Iran would be a bad mistake, a terrible mistake. I'll play for you a very short clip here.
Does anyone outside of Washington actually support a new war in Iran? Well, the Saudi royal family does. So do the leaders of other Sunni Gulf states. They see Iran as their greatest rival, and they'd love to have America fight a war against Iran for them. Why wouldn't they? Despite the fact that virtually every terror attack in America has been inspired not by Iran, but by Iran's Sunni enemy.
So guys, as you heard there, again, Tucker Carlson was right about that too. Again, I don't agree with everything that Tucker Carlson says, but on that point, he was bang on correct. Okay, let's turn our attention now to the charts. We're going to take a look at our war indicator, which is Lockheed Martin. The reason why we look at Lockheed Martin, because in the past, this has been a very useful tool for determining whether a war is likely or less likely. Now, let me just say, guys, that the only reason I'm mentioning this chart of Lockheed Martin is purely for technical and analytical reasons. This is by no means a recommendation to buy or sell the stock. I would not even dream of putting any money into this company for obviously ethical reasons. This is a company that essentially makes money by selling weapons of, again, weapons of war. So I'm not at all interested in this company from a financial perspective. Bottom line is, it's simply a chart that I look at to give me some detail as to whether war is likely or not. So as you know, again, Lockheed Martin makes very sophisticated weapons of war. What is interesting about this chart is look at the breakout that occurred on this chart. Let me just zoom back a little bit and you can see it for yourself. Massive breakout about the 400 region here. Let me just point that out. That's the 400 level of resistance. So as you will see, just recently, again, I think this was due to the Iran crisis, the whole Iran tensions. Look what happened here. Lockheed Martin broke finally above that key level. Now, of course, it is true Lockheed Martin has been in a strong upward trend, but what is interesting is that it's maintained this trend very strongly recently, which seems to be pointing towards a signal. The fact that Lockheed Martin has not, fallen back below the support, which is 400, does tell you something important. It has not fallen below this level. That does seem to point to a slightly higher probability that things may not be completely over like everyone thinks it is. So while the mainstream news may think or may be saying right now that everything is cooled down and it's over, this chart could be saying something different, potentially, but also something else. Let me just go on the weekly charts. Go on the weekly chart for a moment. And there's something interesting we can see here on this chart, which is, again, we can see how it's broken through previous resistance structure, but also now a pulse is fired on the weekly chart as well. We've got a pulse fired to the upside, which is bullish. This seems to indicate, by the way, that we might see a further 8 weeks or maybe 10 weeks of strength in Lockheed Martin, in LMT. So that's a very bullish signal. I would say this. As long as LMT stays above 400, the breakout point, as long as it remains above the 400 level, the path of least resistance and the potential further upside is very strong. So provided we remain above the 400 level, which is also where the velocity position is, there could be further upside here that could take LMT in the long run, potentially towards the 450 to 500 range. By the way, that also means this. If Lockheed Martin were to fall below 400 and remain below 400, I would have to change my mind, because below 400 it means the signal is probably reversed. In other words, that would actually make it more sideways to bearish. So this is the cutoff point for me. As long as it remains above 400, the tensions or a potential conflict for a war in the Middle East with Iran is still high, or I would say at least intermediate to medium. Below this level, then the tensions, again, the potential or the risk of a war may be averted. So that's what we're seeing here on our war indicator. All right, let's take a look at the price of oil as well. Oil did spike initially higher, as you can see. So we saw a massive spike in the price of oil. Everybody was talking about this last week, of course. But look what happened here. It suddenly reversed direction and it fell below the moving average, the 21 moving average, and the last velocity position here. This is actually a bearish move. I'm actually bearish on oil based on what I'm seeing here on this chart. If the price of oil can break 58, break below this trend line as well, I'll become more bearish in the price of oil. Personally, I believe that in the long run, that's where we're heading. I think we're going to break this trend line and go lower, below 58. I don't actually think that a war with Iran is likely. I don't think it's going to happen. And I think President Trump is making the right moves, sending the right signals to prevent war. So that's a good thing. So there is a kind of a mixed picture here. The price of oil seems to indicate we're not heading for a war, but LMT is still showing, well, maybe things are not completely died down just yet. So let's see whether LMT can actually confirm this. We'll keep an eye on this. If Lockheed Martin falls below 400, that would be a good sign, I think, for the overall tensions and the conflict, a potential conflict in the Middle East and with Iran. But if we see Lockheed Martin pushing further higher, especially with speed, if this pushes further higher with speed, then I might actually become more worried about the potential situation there. But anyway, that's something we'll keep an eye on there. Let me know, guys, what you think. Let me know your views and opinions and comments below this video. I look forward to reading your comments. And guys, if this video has helped, please give it a thumbs up. And also please subscribe for future videos. Thanks very much indeed. Bye for now.